Awesome. So welcome everyone to Hire's webinar on elevating your TA function. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about preparing for an IPO. And we have some incredible talent leaders with us today. Alla Mezhvinsky, who is head of talent at Instacart, and Carla McIntosh, formerly VP of talent at Reddit. So for those that haven't met me, I'm Chris Abbass, co-founder of Hire, a community that is here to help TA leaders navigate the challenges of volatile markets and provide executive learning opportunities. For people who don't know, the community was founded over 10 years ago in London, really deeply embedded into the startup tech community, and has grown to become a global community of 12,000 members. For those that are not in the community, it's free to join. And for leaders, we're setting up the Hire Leaders Network in 9 cities across the US and Europe, with in-person events starting in Q3. So if you're not a member, please scan the QR code here to apply. Again, it's completely free, and there's lots of discussion happening and lots of events happening every month. I think a lot of people feel that an IPO and going through that journey is a career-defining milestone. And our panelists are industry veterans with extensive experience, having recently guided their organizations through IPO preparations and beyond. So the aim of this webinar is to ensure that you have actionable insight into how you can achieve your desired result at IPO and past that point. And before I hand over to our panelists, I'd like to thank our headline sponsor, Talentful. Talentful is a global embedded RPO with a presence across the US, EMEA, LATAM, and APAC. They provide dedicated sourcing, recruiting, and coordination teams to the world's most ambitious tech companies. So if you're interested in finding out why companies like Atlassian, Alphabet, and Microsoft use Talentful, then visit talentful.com, and we'll also be following up after this webinar with exclusive discounts for Hire members. So with that out of the way, we do have questions submitted, and we are going to be answering people's questions as we go. So if you have something interesting, you have a question that you'd like to ask the panel, please put it into the chat or Q&A function, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Okay, so without further ado, I wanted to hand over to the panel, Alla and Carla, to introduce themselves and a bit about them and their journey so far. So firstly, Carla, handing over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Chris. First, hello to everyone that is watching this right now. I am a 25-year talent acquisition industry veteran and a literal veteran of the Air Force, and providing insights and sharing knowledge in forums like this is super close to my heart. So I'm incredibly excited to share all the information about my journey, and hopefully it'll help some of you all in the future.
And over to you, Alla.
Hi, my name is Alla Mezhvinsky. I'm currently the head of talent at Instacart. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, and I've had the pleasure of having numerous roles across different companies. And also I've been at 3 companies that have gone public during my time there in different capacity and scope. So I'm excited to speak about that experience and share that knowledge with all of you. And thank you for joining.
Awesome. So to jump straight into it, I think when we had the discussion about important things to cover here, we felt that there was a need to maybe look at kind of pre-IPO and then life afterwards. So, starting from the top, you've obviously gone through this process. You maybe had certain expectations leading up to it, and when you're in different roles, what this might be like. So having gone through it and had that experience now, what were some of the most important lessons and maybe mistakes you learned from navigating the IPO process? I'll hand over to Alla first, and then we can have an open discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the learning was really around timing. And I think the timing is ambiguous up until the last moment, but you have to take a lot of steps in order to prepare, no matter when it happens. And I think the other learning is there's so much that happens in the background that actually doesn't hit recruiting or the people function until much later on. And a lot of the time you sort of start to hear the company talking about going public, even filing the S1, and you sort of start to get this feeling of wanting to prepare, but you have to be very patient, and you have to kind of think through, how do you focus on the day-to-day and not get distracted by maybe some of the conversations that are happening, because at the end of the day, the goal for recruiting doesn't change. It's you have to keep the eye on the prize. You have to get people in the door. In fact, it's really important to build the bench and bring in great folks and not get distracted. So I think it's more just around understanding that it doesn't happen overnight, and it could be years. Even if your company's talking about it today, it could be years until it actually happens, and it could change. And I've been part of companies where you think it's going to happen within a few months, and then there's either economic changes or leadership decides they're not ready yet, and then it sort of starts again. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. And one of the bigger surprises for me that I had to sort of get used to as I went through this a couple of times.
Awesome. And passing over to you, Carla.
Yeah, plus one to what Alla said. I think a lot of it during that time is really just managing your emotions. I think people think that there's this, well, there's number one, there's a buildup of anxiety and the unknown. And there, in a weird way, there becomes a lot of fear. And I think people expect that, all of a sudden this event's going to happen and life as they know it is going to change. And so for me personally, I spent a lot of time just really reminding people it is business as usual. It is certainly a momentous occasion. We will, get there, but until we get there, just continue to keep your head down, do the things that you need to do that help to even position us to be in this moment. But that was really just funny to me because people really just thought that all of a sudden life as they knew it would change so dramatically. And that part was pretty fun to me, pretty interesting just to navigate.
Yeah. And you mentioned here quite a lot of the stuff that it seems like what you're saying is this is a big moment, but really it's just more of the same. A lot of what you're focused on and what your priorities are. Is there anything that like dramatically changes? Was there something that really did change during the process, or for the most part, it was, as you're saying, just BAU driving towards the same goals?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I do think the one thing that I was, I kept top of mind was thinking about, when you're a private company, you have the benefit of sort of doing your business and you aren't, your information is not sort of publicly available. And I do think that when you do go public, it's important to realize that, what you do could potentially be amplified to other audiences. So you don't have that privacy that you may have already had. But I think with that is an opportunity. So for people, even on a professional note, their professional profiles can be elevated by being a part of a company that has gone public. So really preparing them for that. So, it's not necessarily what will you do different. It's just how will you be more mindful that people are watching.
Yeah. And from what both of you were saying, there seems to be like this psychological element of how to manage the psychology within your team. How did you manage that, and what were some of the impacts that you saw? And did you, impose any specific like tactics or a strategy on how you maintain people's focus and energy and motivation during that time? Because I can imagine from what you're saying, if you think an IPO is going to happen, you get all excited, you tell your friends, you tell your parents, and then it doesn't happen, and you're like, oh no, it's like a demotivating cycle to some degree. So how did you both manage that with your teams?
Yeah, I think, that honesty and actually having that conversation that is not something that we should be focusing on day in and day out. It will happen when it happens, and it's going to be a great day. But when I was at Square, Sarah Fryer, who was the CFO at the time, taking the company public, and her constant reminder to the team is it's a moment in time. And just remember that, right? Like nothing actually changes. And to Carla's point, we have to become more strict about reporting, and we have to really think through how we're spending our money and the money that we're making. But that's a business decision, and that's a business focus at all times. And I think stressing that often and reminding people of that is really important. I think kind of going back to your question of, does anything drastically change? I think we should always have goals, but I think it's really important to set and make sure that you have really specific goals for the company. I do think that there's a little bit of more eyes maybe on headcount planning that I've seen happen across the board, right? There's financial forecasting that goes along with sort of getting ready to go public. And so like being very crystal clear on what the goals for the team still are and reminding people that nothing really changes other than we are going to go from a pre-IPO company to a post-IPO company, is really important. I also think that I've seen some companies do this well and others maybe not so much, is employee education, right? Because you're not just thinking about the recruiting team, you're thinking about all of the people in the company. And some of them have much more experience with it and know all the things that happen when a company gets ready to go public or when it goes public. And there are some employees who have no idea. And I think the employees who have less knowledge about it are actually the ones who have the potential to have more anxiety than less, because they just don't know what it means. And so having employee education and really partnering with cross-functional teams across the company, whether it's legal or finance or comp or the tax team or benefits, is really important to start to stand those up, not far out, but as it gets closer and as the company potentially has a date in sight. And that, I think, alleviates some of the questions, some of the swirl, some of the uncertainties for, again, not just the talent team, but across the whole company.
Excellent. That's a great point.
Yeah,
Carla,
great points. Yeah, great points, Alla. I agree with that. I think, at least for me personally, one of the things that I spent a lot of time on was trying to stay ahead of any questions. So I lived in creating FAQ docs, things that that would get ahead of questions that may come from candidates, candidates who may have recently accepted an offer, those who were in flight, even within the team, just ensuring that they had the confidence to articulate things that they felt good about. And so really evolving those in real time on an active basis was very important. I think the employer value proposition, that was an area that people were very concerned about. It's sort of what, to the point I made earlier about the perception of doom and gloom, people realizing, wait a minute, there's candidates that I'm working with who may really want to join a company before it goes public. What will I do with these candidates, if we go public while they're in flight? And so really navigating that and making sure, that I created kind of FAQs, that documents that they could reference and have on hand, but B, even asking them to sort of role play and teach back to me, how would those conversations go? Because it's very important. You don't want to have people mid-flight, and when you're talking, you either A, aren't clear on what you need to share, or B, you don't have the confidence, because that won't be something that savvy candidates would be attracted to. So that was something that was very important.
Awesome, thank you. And leading up to this pivotal point in the company's trajectory, did you change the kind of skills that you were looking for in your own teams, whether that was the recruiting team specifically or the wider business? Was there a change in focus for the skills that you needed to bring on board? And can you maybe talk a bit about that and how you bridge those gaps or filled those gaps leading up to IPO? Alla.
I'm happy to take this one. Yeah. I don't know that we changed necessarily the skills. I think there are certain teams that did index on hiring individuals who have had experience taking the company public. So teams like legal and finance, comms teams, right? Because as we were getting ready to go public, or as we were kind of doing the readiness, it's important to have individuals who've been through it before and know what it takes. And so I think there are certain teams who indexed on hiring for that specific experience. But going back to what we talked about, everything else doesn't change, right? We're still focused on achieving the company goals that we've had set for a while. So I think there's just a little bit of shift in some teams. I also think that you start to sort of, hopefully by the time you're going public, you understand the profiles and the people that end up doing really well in your company, and I think you get really crisp and clear on that, and so it doesn't change, but I think you become as a company by that point you sort of know, and so you're starting to get better at hiring and understanding the quality of hire and what works and what doesn't and what people do well. And I think earlier on when you're a startup, you're figuring all that out, but hopefully by the time you are going public or getting ready for it, you have a better sense of it.
Yeah. And having gone through this process a few times, do you think there's something specifically as a leader, like for yourself or for leaders that maybe are going to be going through this, is like skills that in retrospect, you think were really important that you had, or experience that you had that enabled you to take your team through this? To either of you, I'd like both your input on that question.
Yeah, I think actually specifically when Instacart went public, we went public during a time where I think there were 3 other companies that went public during that time. And I think what prepared me personally for it is actually just the economic changes and how much the recruiting team had been through and companies have been through, and devaluation and valuation changes, and just so much economic pressure post-pandemic. And so I think actually just having to navigate so many challenging things conditioned me to navigate then this other thing. And so my advice is, look at every challenge that you're going through as a preparation for being able to like run the marathon. Because at the end of the day, this is just as challenging, exciting, but just as challenging as any one of those things. And Carla had alluded to this, but so much of it is that mental preparation. It's how do you get the team to not be nervous about it, get excited about it, not get sidetracked by it. And so it's really just being able to have those conversations with the teams, get them back on track, get them focused on what's actually important. So I don't think it was anything particular. It was nice that I had been through a couple of IPOs at other companies, not in the same scope at all, but I had sort of understood what a quiet period was, or what, the listing day would look like, or what S1 filing meant, and that it wasn't going to be, the next day that we go public. Certainly, like, get comfortable with those terms and learn what all of that means and what the cycle of IPO readiness looks like. But I actually think just like doing the hard things, and any of them prepare you to navigate this as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think for me personally, in an odd way, I found myself drawing a lot on my prior experience in the military. For those who may not be aware, part of my job in the Air Force was helping to control fighter jets, and things can be very, very normal. And then all of a sudden, something really dramatic starts to happen, and you have to flip into action mode. I did that, and I used to use a lot of storytelling in my one-to-ones with my team, in my all hands meeting. And I took people through the evolution of expect the unexpected. As we all know, if you prepare for something, so, for those who do control fighter jets, one of the things that they do is they practice visualization. So I always wanted my team to envision yourself in this moment. What will that look like? And most importantly, how will you respond? And I just had to just keep drilling in. You're built for this. There will not be something dramatically different than what you're already navigating. There could be more or less, meaning more hiring, less hiring, more candidates to manage, more questions to answers. But these are things that you're already doing. So a lot of the anxiety was really unfounded. And to Alla's point, really consistently pointing them to the resources. So it was my job to fact find any piece of information that was out, be it publicly available or things internally that our communications team were standing up. I really made sure that I always let the team know that those resources were there. And as they were being evolved or updated in real time, making sure that I kept that top of mind for them. And that really, really helped tremendously.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm sure that's exciting and scary at the same time. The IPO process is like controlling fighter jets, but thanks for that. Now, one of the questions that people are asking in the chat, and also that we had already kind of lined up, was around reporting and governance, and how that changed. And I think that one of the questions here is, what changes from a reporting and compliance perspective for the recruitment and TA team once the company goes public? Is there something that you guys can point to, and what you had to do inside your teams to make that happen?
Yeah, I can take that. I think number one, just making sure overall documentation was in a great place. And that is one of the benefits I say that private companies have, is that, oftentimes you can run a little bit looser than normal. But I think, in my opinion, people, they sort of perceive being public and private in two different buckets. And my thing that I would emphasize was, why not act as if now? Why do you need to wait for the literal moment for you to start to tighten up your processes and documentation? So what did that look like? You want to make sure that you had, actual processes documented, no matter how, messy they were. Get the baseline process as much as you can documented. Separately, think about consistency of process. Think about, having a very tight exception policy. So when you do make a concession, what are the conditions that will sort of drive that piece? Reporting, what are the main metrics that may be important now? So as you're leading up to IPO, people really want to understand, to Alla's point about hiring, they want to understand more of that pipeline data. Like for those key strategic roles that are super important, how many candidates do we have? What's all the data on that? When can we expect certain outcomes? And then the most important thing was the accuracy of the data. So what are the safeguards that you have in place to ensure that the data that you're leveraging is accurate? And then I think a big challenge for a lot of companies is ensuring that you identify as many single sources of truth as possible. Because what can happen in many companies is that many different people are looking at different tools to get certain insights, and then you get that inconsistency, which really can have a very, very negative business consequence. So those are some of the things. I think the other piece was also thinking about systems access. Remember, a lot of private companies run very, very loose. And so as you do build to become a public company, I just think it's best practice anyway. Need to know basis. Maybe certain sets of people have access to data and information, but really being mindful of who really needs to have it. And more importantly, for how long. So once they don't need it anymore, do you have system set up to sort of claw that access back? Those were some of the things to me that were super important. And then I think the final one, for those companies, and many do, that augment their staff with various flavors of contingent workforce. Making sure that you have very tight processes around that you have people categorized appropriately. Because again, when you go public, anything that you're doing can have more scrutiny. So you really want to make sure that you've really looked at every aspect of the talent pipeline to include augmentation staff, independent contractors, even your vendor relationships. And then you replicate some of the things around systems, access control, et cetera. Those are things that were top of mind.
Great. Do you have anything to add, Alla?
I think very well said, Carla. The only one thing maybe is like an example. When you're an earlier company, maybe you don't have all the systems and tools. To Carla's point, it's easy to sort of bypass some steps. We've all had that like referral that was referred and some side conversations happened, and all of a sudden they're being hired, and you're like, wait, what? Okay. Operate as if you're going to get audited. Like that's the mindset that you should have, because we do actually. There's a compliance team at Instacart that will reach out to me and ask for actual snapshots of like candidate, the steps that they went through, the templates that they received, because they want to make sure that we're hiring equitably, that we have a process in place. And that doesn't happen often, but there is an audit that happens because we're now a publicly traded company and we have to be compliant. And so I would get in the mindset of you can get audited, and therefore you want to have all your ducks in a row, your T's crossed and I's dotted, so that you don't have to worry about it. And so like set up those systems and those processes to get there.
Awesome. And something that I was thinking as you both were talking was the tools that you're using, the platforms that you're using are really important during this process in terms of how easy this information is to record and access and report on. How far ahead are you thinking about, are my systems and tools, is my ATS, going to be okay to get me to IPO? Did you think about that? Was that a conscious decision? Did you change the tools that you were using because of that? Like, how did you think about that piece?
Yeah, I think it's less about, when you're going to go public. But again, I think when the company goes public, you've probably been around for a couple of years and you've scaled. And so it's actually the scale that gets you to want these tools than it is the public piece. And I think it almost happens around the same trajectory or the same timeline within the company's growth. And so hopefully it's not like, oh my God, we're going to go public, we now need to do this. Hopefully you're thinking about along the way, because you're probably hiring more. You're probably needing a bit more rigor in your process. You probably have a bigger recruiting team, and therefore you want more consistency. And let's be honest, like a lot of earlier stage companies operate out of a spreadsheet. And, that's what I knew 15 years ago, because first of all, not a lot of these tools were readily available or were even around. But now with so much innovation in the recruiting space and so much available tools, you really don't need to be in spreadsheets anymore. And the reality is that those systems are a lot more compliant. They're a lot more secure than a spreadsheet is. And so you sort of, again, want to have this mindset of like, how do you set yourself up to not have to switch from spreadsheets into these systems later on, because it's much harder to do when you're bigger and you're operating in higher volume and bigger scope. And how do you start to kind of build those systems and get them in place earlier on?
Cool. So is there a kind of size that you think that you should be thinking about that? Or is it, as kind of level of scale that you're thinking, okay, this needs to be an enterprise grade solution. I need to be thinking it can handle it all the way up to, multiple thousand hires a year?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's enough options out there that serve a lot of different size companies, right? There's companies that I know that are 100 people and they already have some of these systems in place. And those systems are easy to implement and they're low cost and they're, like I wouldn't recommend, hopefully no one's on from Workday on the call, but like you don't use Workday if you are a 50-person company. It's too heavy, too much. There's plenty of other options that get you from A to B, right? You don't need to go from A to Z in that. And then you evolve, right? As you grow, you evolve. So I don't know that there's like a number, right? If you're a seed stage company, you probably don't need that. But if you have a roadmap and if you've got some traction and you're hiring 50 plus people, like you probably should have some sort of an ATS that allows you to organize things and organize those candidates, because you're now working with various hiring managers and interviewers. So I don't know that there's like a too early. I think there's a too late is the problem. And I think we oftentimes get to that place where we did in the past. And again, I'm so grateful for the innovation that we've seen in the recruiting tool space. There's just been so much, I would say, over the last 10 years that I've personally seen, that there's something for everyone out there at the moment, I think. And I'm sure with AI and, just continued push for that, we're going to see a lot more out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Carla, anything to add on that before I move to the next question?
Yeah, I think to Alla's point, it's less about sort of a magic number in terms of scale, but for me, what was top of mind, you realize sometimes you can have all the amazing tooling, known to man, but sometimes when you've been moving so fast and so hard, you realize you're underutilizing the functionality of those tools. And so for me, there was a really tight partnership with our analytics team to make sure we were optimizing the features. Because a lot of times, like reporting, sometimes we would be doing manual reporting on things that could be done, could be automated within the tool, or standing up spreadsheets when you could actually run that reporting within some of your systems. So that was a really, really big focus. And then separately, I think using that time to kind of sunset some things that take a lot of energy and effort to maintain, but are really underutilized. So running some analyses on how many people are really looking at these things. And then one of my favorite questions to ask is, if someone's doing work, if you didn't do it one day or 1 week, if no one comes looking for it, you should have never been doing it. And so when I applied that lens across some of the things that we were doing, we realized a lot of it was just stuff that was being maintained and wasn't really being used. But then we use that time to sort of poll our different stakeholders. What are the things that you need? What are the pieces of data that are most important to you from a team perspective? What are the insights that you need to do a better job of recruiting, and then building around that, and then taking that back to the tooling team to make sure you're really, really standing up processes to support that need.
Awesome. Thank you. And one of the things that we've talked about is, as you're leading teams through this experience in this journey, there's maybe a misconception on the amount of information you actually know yourself. So can you maybe speak about that and what you do as a leader to get as much as you can, or the right information from the board or from your leaders, that you can guide the team effectively?
I'll take that one. Yeah, I think honestly, there is a misconception that people, especially leaders of TA organizations, that we have all of the key information. What's important for people on the call to know is a company going through IPO, it's very, very important that that circle of information is very, very tight. To Alla's point about the moving target line, it literally can become a bouncing dot. And for that reason, you have to, those who are in, quote, the know, it has to be few and far between. And so for me, I would just convey that to my team and say, it's okay. We as leaders, I think, are wired to have all the answers. It's actually okay in those moments to say, I don't have the answers, but here's why. And I would reiterate the importance of that. As we know, leaks are something that are detrimental potentially to and can have catastrophic, fallout to an IPO. But just emphasizing to the team that, it's a need to know basis. And right now, we don't have all of the information that we think we need. But what I can tell you is, and I would just kind of share that and kept a rolling, update with the team on that piece. At the end of the day, going back to where Alla and I started, for TA, we are one of the few types of positions that our job does not change with an IPO. There can be more hiring, there can be less hiring, but there's always going to be hiring. So nothing that we do in terms of our playbook will change.
Yeah, that's a really good kind of anchor to think about as a leader, is that, there might be all the kind of chaos and the hustle around the IPO, but really fundamentally your job and your goals are the same. It's just taking people through that journey. So one of the things as well that has been dramatically different, I know that you've been in different companies that maybe have exited at different IPO at different moments. This recent kind of couple of years has been very different to kind of the pre-COVID era. So can you maybe speak about, what the difference has been like IPOing in a slower time, maybe economically and market-wise, than a kind of much more competitive and busier time, and how that maybe changed your approach or changed how your business managed that process and the kind of ramification afterwards? Alla, if you
Yeah,
want to
I
go.
think there's two things that come to mind. I think the first one is because of the economic uncertainty, there's been fewer companies that have gone public, and in fact, very few. And so in the time that Instacart did it, the date was very much unknown up until last minute. And I think in a different economy, that shifts less. It still can shift, but I think there's a little bit more certainty because companies are going public every single day and you're just sort of getting into the cycle of it. And if you're ready, you're ready. I think, in an environment like this, a company may be ready, but the market is not. And that's the one thing you cannot control, right? We can control our business and being ready for it, but it doesn't mean that day to day the market isn't going to drop and have some significant to it. So I think that was maybe a little bit more volatile and just created a lot more uncertainty there. So that's kind of on the timing of it. I think the other piece that is interesting is in a better economic market, you sort of expect some attrition post a company going public. A lot of people are with the company for a long time. They know it's coming. They want to be there for that momentous occasion. They want to celebrate. They want that on their resume, but they're ready to actually go. And so in other times, you do expect a little bit of an attrition spike. However, in an economy like this, that hasn't necessarily been the case because there's just not that many opportunities. And so we haven't seen as much of a spike as maybe previously companies have.
Interesting. Awesome. So I'm aware of time, and I want to spend some time talking about the kind of post-IPO experience, because I know that we've talked about how things were leading up to it, and really it's about driving towards the same goals and building an excellent talent function just as you would have before. But I guess maybe there's more scrutiny on the detail, like the reporting and the compliance and things like that. So maybe you have that in the back of your mind. But after IPO, you both were saying things can actually materially change in some ways. And one of those points was the kind of employee value proposition, the kind of candidates you attract, how you're going out to market. Can you maybe speak about how that changed and how you managed that as a leader?
Sure. I think, there's always different flavors of candidate, dare I say. There are some candidates who they, have never had that experience. So they desperately want to join a company just for the experience from their perception of, the financial benefits of doing so. So you have that. Then you have some candidates who, maybe they just don't want to be a part of a public company. For them, they, just hop from, pre-IPO company to pre-IPO company and so forth. And so I think you have to, in my opinion, spend a little bit more time understanding, what is the candidate's driver for wanting to join your organization. And suss it out, because if it's someone that just wants to be a part of a company, the closer you get to IPO, then they may not be a candidate that is going to be with you for the long haul. And it's important, you want to build a sustainable talent pipeline where people stay and they don't attrit often. So really digging into those candidate motivations, I think, are very important. And I think also, always sharing as much as you can share with candidates, because I think that that's helpful, because sometimes you just make one extra statement and you realize, wow, this candidate's not aligned to what we need for the future. So for me, it was just very important that my team was really, really in lockstep with candidate drivers. Like, were they aligned to the mission of the company? Would they want to join the company for the right reason? And that's not unique to where my most recent employer, any company. I think it's just very, very important, especially in these economic times, to understand, are these folks wanting to join for the right reasons?
Awesome, thank you. Alla, do you have anything to add on that point?
No, I think that's spot on.
No, awesome. And so someone has asked, which is kind of parallel to this, is did your compensation philosophies change after going public? And maybe not in total detail, but maybe an overview of if that did change and how it changed.
I think in some companies, yes, and in others, no. I think a lot of companies, again, part of the IPO readiness, start to really sharpen their compensation philosophies. And so hopefully by the time you actually go public, you're good and you don't have to change anything. What I have seen happen in the past is obviously going through and thinking whether you're offering equity or RSUs is a question that people ask and start to fine tune a little bit. And then whether you're offering a value-based package or you're offering a number of shares or RSUs is another thing that changes. I think the bigger change that does happen is when you're talking to candidates about their package, you have to talk about how the price is determined, because that's very different, right? Pre-IPO, you have your valuation and it's sort of this potential number. But when you are public, that's available to everybody to see what the stock is worth. But it also changes by the time the candidate starts, right? And it becomes a new hire. And so that was one of the things that all companies that I worked for had to really figure out, like, some of them do, like, it's the average of the past month. It's, there's different ways that you can go about it. But I think that's the piece that has to get really crisp and clear. And that shift has to happen right around the IPO, because you're talking to the candidate one day and you're, still selling the package of this is what it could be. And then next day you go public, and the next day you're telling a different story about how that price is determined. So that's one of the things to think through, and as part of your compensation, but both how you're describing it to candidates, but also the philosophy of it.
Excellent. Carla, anything to add there?
No, you definitely nailed it there. I will say at least something that was very important for me was, unfortunately, there's always kind of that cutoff line in the sand, where you're flipping from whatever you used to do to whatever the new way will be. And obviously that impacts candidates. So really going back to what I was talking about, where your team is really prepped on how do you articulate the change, the why the change, and how do you really navigate that pool of candidates, those who were on the cusp of kind of old way versus new way, who literally, the day before, maybe it was going to be X that you're going to be offered, and then the next day it's going to be Y. That to me was very, very important. And it's just one of those unfortunate things with anything. There's always going to have to be a cutover date. And so to Alla's point, that, being able to really talk through that, the rationale behind that, the why, and just make candidates feel supported as best you can.
And that transition from, pre to post IPO, and let's say you are changing your comp philosophy, there's a different way of talking about compensation. It could be confusing to some people. How did you make sure your team had that education or that enablement? Who was driving that? Who was responsible for that? And how did you make sure you had a team that was ready to execute on those conversations with confidence?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carla. I was just going to say, it takes a village. It truly, hopefully you're in a place where you do have cross-functional partners that you can work with. Comms team becomes your best friend. Those talking points have to be extremely crisp and tight and consistent, right? You want every recruiter, every person on the team to be speaking the same language in the exact same way. So we partnered a lot with the comms team on ensuring those talking points are ready for when we needed them. And then, of course, legal and finance, right? They all have a lot of input on what can be said. You're also in a quiet period, which is incredibly challenging to navigate because you really can't say much or comment on a lot of things or answer questions that are coming from candidates. And so I would say, that partnership between legal, finance, and comms, and like the stock admins were incredibly important at that time.
And was that driven by you? Was that driven by someone else in terms of putting all and coordinating all of that? Or was that just, an initiative that you all had to just, muck in and work together to get it done?
Yeah, at different companies has been led in different ways. We had most recently we had a kind of a working team that was focused specifically on IPO readiness, and so they led the initiatives and sort of like called the right people, when the time was right. But I've also seen it done many different ways, where it's either the TA leader or the comms leader or the compensation leader who's sort of driving those things. So it just depends what the setup is.
Okay, awesome.
I do, sorry, just to add there, I do think you have to be vocal about what the team needs, and that needs to be led by the TA leader, right? Because there's a million things going on and every team needs something. And so it's really important to highlight, hey, in order for this to go well, here's what the TA team needs, and sort of keep reiterating it if you're not getting that. And so that's driven by the TA leader, but it truly is a cross-functional effort across the board.
If I can add one thing there, I think one thing that is critically important, there's a lot of different questions and people that are at different sort of maturity levels in terms of experience with IPOs and kind of what's going on. So that everybody has questions, or different people have questions and different types of questions. It is critically important to stand up a single source of truth as a question repository. So when people do have questions, where can they input them? So that way you ensure that every question is captured. And then most importantly, that every question gets that sort of answer in the FAQ doc that can be shared back out. So for any leader on here that's thinking about, going public, or always stand up a single source of truth to capture those questions.
Awesome. That's a great idea. And people can, I don't know what you use, Carla, but like Google Sheets has something, really simple and easy that people can use. So I'm going to move on to a final question, that we pre-prepared, and then move on to some questions from the audience. So the final question is for both of you is, looking back over your experiences, is there anything that you would have done different, or if you did this again, you would have focused on more?
I'll take that one. I think just one easy one, really taking time to celebrate the moment. What I would convey to my team is, and for anybody on the call, when you are part of an organization that goes public, you are part of history. In particular, if that company is within the tech space, what that means is there will never be another set of employees that can say that they've done that for that company ever in the history of mankind. And unfortunately, sometimes you're so worried about all the other things that you don't take the time to really celebrate that piece of it. And if you're someone like me, and this is my my issue, I guess, but my ability just to sit in that moment and celebrate all the hard work and just embrace what this means, I can recall literally the day of, within an hour or two, already thinking about my to-do list. Okay, so now I need to do A, B, C, and D. And if I were to go back, I think that that's a mistake. I think that I should have spent more time just sitting in the moment, celebrating it and taking it all in.
Yeah, such a big moment. Thanks for that, Carla.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. I even remember like thinking on the day of like, gosh, maybe I should have like made this a bigger deal with the team. I'm like, I don't know, organize something. And we kind of did, but I think there's definitely an opportunity for more of that. I also think that it's important to focus on like preparing. We talked about like you don't want to prepare too far in advance, but I've also been in situations where like you didn't think of something and all of a sudden the day of you're not in the moment because you're scrambling to like fine tune this one bullet point, or like, oh shoot, what happens tomorrow, because it's business as usual tomorrow. And so like you're not going to get everything right, but as much as you can actually like think through truly like what do we need tomorrow, because tomorrow it is business as usual. And how do you kind of catch all of those things in the moment? I'll give you an example. So in one of the previous companies, I think the talking points actually came together too late. And we couldn't enjoy the moment because we were, on Slack with the comms team and like, could we say this and can we say that? And so from that learning, I knew that the next time that we were going to happen, we actually, like, no matter when we go public, we should just have that ready and know that we're going to need it so that we could take a pause and enjoy the moment. And to Carla's point, like celebrate, and then we're not worried about the next day. And so like try and truly like go through the scenarios of what you're going to need, try and prepare before, so then you can really enjoy the moment and then, ease into it versus scrambling and being reactive.
Awesome. Thank you, Alla. So I'm just going to move over to some questions. We answered a few as we were going, but some ones. So Nita said, during IPO readiness stage, what are talent attraction and employer brand initiatives that you needed to look into and take action that was reflected in board meetings? Is there anything that jumps to mind?
Yeah, I'll talk about it. I think mapping kind of your critical keep the lights on roles across the company. That was very important, and you wanted, if depending on the maturity of your sourcing organization or the way that your team tracks talent, really ensuring that you have a warm pipeline of candidates for those roles at all time. And if in my case, it was also very important because, oftentimes TA, we're trying to solve for every other organization's needs. But I actually flipped that, and I wanted to make sure that I dedicated time to think about my own team's health. And so it was important that I work with my TA managers to ensure that they had warm pipelines of even augmentation resources, contract recruiters and sourcers that, if we saw a spike, we'd be ready to go, because by the time you need it, you're already too late. So that was one. I think separately, thinking about succession plans, in addition to the keep the lights on roles, just thinking about critical roles in general, across the company, managers, sometimes key IC roles, just making sure that, you identify that. The other piece, to Alla's point, there are folks that are more likely than not to potentially attrit. So when you look at those folks that were, initial employees, that really were there way back in the day, those folks, and rightfully so, they may finally say, hey, you know what, I now want to move on to the next thing. So understanding who those folks were, just so that you had a plan. And it may never come to fruition, but at least being mindful of what could happen, and then looking at the resourcing within your team to say, could we handle X amount of volume if it hit us in an accelerated manner? And so that was really, really important.
Awesome. Thanks, Carla. Anything to add on your side, Alla? No. Cool. We'll move to the next question. We talked about this briefly in terms of reporting and compliance, but were there any specific talent metrics that had like a really, a lot of attention on from the board during that IPO process?
For us, it wasn't, I mean, it kind of similar to what Carla had answered in the previous question. It's more about like the open headcount, right? Because they're now forecasting equity that's going to go out. So it's really having a crisp understanding of what the headcount plan is and how many roles were open and approved and what the rest of the year looked like. So that whatever we were putting out there, right? Because we're now talking about our financials externally, that those numbers all added up. And obviously, the talent in the company is one of the more expensive line items. And so being very crisp about what we're committing to as a company in terms of hiring for the rest of the year or in general, I think we definitely paid a bit more attention to it and got really clear on what that looked like, and really sort of like tried to figure out what like the actual goal was, and how much maybe buffer we had, and sticking to that and making sure that we weren't going above that.
I'm assuming lots of long meetings with FP&A got you to that place. Who are the main partners that you were working with there?
Definitely the finance team. Yes,
Yeah.
partnered very closely just to truly understand what the company was committed to, both from a butts and seats perspective, but also really what we were trying to hire for the rest of the year, and the pace, right? I think that's probably another important factor that I'm not sure that the board looked at, but I know our leadership team did, because we also wanted to make sure that we were, while not over hiring, that we were able to give the teams the resources they need to then move the needle on some of the initiatives that we're working for. So I think the pace is another important factor for the leadership team to really look into and understand.
Excellent. And so the last question here is from James, and he says, we're planning for an IPO in 2027. How would you recommend changing how your team operates in that period to suit the changing needs of the business? And Carla, I know that you're a big believer in AQ as a general setup. So we may hand this one to you, and then Alla can jump in after.
Yes, everyone, and to clarify the acronym, so AQ is adaptability quotient. Literally, I would say my last two roles, that has been the key defining thing that I've embedded within the team. I think as you're, in this climate, to be honest with you, not even being pre-IPO or post-IPO, just the new way of working. My strong recommendation is ensuring that you build the adaptability quotient within your team. And what is that? The ability to lean into change with optimism. It means we all love to have folks that are SMEs in their area, but I think they need secondary and tertiary areas of expertise as well. And so, for example, if you have people that are primarily a recruiter, ensuring that they do understand how to successfully source, and not just sourcing for things that they've already worked on before, but new things. You need a highly fungible team, because you don't know what the needs of the business will be. And by the time you have to react, especially if you need to attract net new talent, it's too late and you're already behind. So if you can build the muscles within the team that you have, that's a way to build their skill sets anyway. And that's important now in this tight job market. We as leaders want to ensure that people have robust skills in their toolkit that they can leverage to keep themselves gainfully employed. So making sure that people are cross-trained, that you don't have single points of failure. If you have one person and they're the expert and they're the brain trust and they haven't documented processes and only they know where the thing is for that important group, that is complete suicide. It's the thing that will certainly sink you. So really ensuring that you scale those key performers in your team, and most importantly, that you know how they do their work, and that process is documented, heavily, and that more than one person has access to that documentation too.
Absolutely. Alla, anything to add there?
Absolutely. Again, I think it's less about IPO, post-IPO, or pre-IPO. I think it's just the nature of the market, and in general, obviously, it just makes anyone much more a master of a lot of different things, which is always a good skill to have. And I do think that the other part of it is there's some people who are better at data than others, and there always will be, but it doesn't mean that we should accept that. And having a team and working through the team understanding what the data is and what it looks like, and the accuracy of the inputs that they have in their ATS actually matters. And so I think like becoming a much more data-centric team, again, pre-IPO, post-IPO is just an incredible skill to have. And as things continue to innovate and evolve in the recruiting space, I think it's going to be more and more of that. And so getting the recruiters kind of at a baseline, really understanding that data, whether it's pass-through rates, acceptance rates, working backwards in terms of what they need to, what activity they need to fill the pipeline, is really important skill to have, and will certainly be handy in all environments, and especially this one.
Can I add one thing on that too? I think one critically important thing around data is also making sure that you are like splicing out that headcount and the hiring. And what do I mean by that? Like, you understand like what percentage of our open roles are attrits, are backfill roles, which ones are incremental, and most importantly, which ones are incrementals for those key investment areas for the companies, meaning the ones that if we do this, they're revenue generating, as an example. Really making sure that you are, actively tracking how are we performing against those really key roles, because we know in this climate, any new roles that are granted must be for a really important reason. So you have to almost track those separately to make sure your team is really making traction and progress against those. Awesome.
Well, that wraps things up. And I just want to thank Alla and Carla for their time. It was such a well-rounded conversation, very insightful. And it's incredibly rare to get two high-tier leaders like this in one room talking about something so specific and useful. So thank you very much to Carla and Alla. Thank you to everyone who came along. Again, if you're not a member of the Hire community, scan the QR code or visit hirehq.com to join. And please keep an eye on your inbox for further information. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.